World War I, the Great War, a conflict that would forever change the course of history, a conflict so devastating, so world-altering, that it earned these ominous titles. It began with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, an event that set off a chain reaction across Europe. From 1914 to 1918, Europe was engulfed in a maelstrom of violence, a conflict that drew in nations from across the globe. The map of Europe, once a patchwork of empires and alliances, was about to be redrawn in blood. It was a war that shattered empires, redrew maps, and left an indelible mark on the 20th century. Soldiers from every corner of the world were drawn into this unprecedented conflict, each fighting for their own reasons, each with their own story. The aftermath of the war saw the collapse of empires and the birth of new nations. Borders were redrawn, and the political landscape of Europe was forever altered. The world watched in horror as millions of soldiers marched off to a new kind of war, a war of trenches, machine guns, and poison gas. The brutality of trench warfare, with its endless mud rats and the ever-present threat of death, was unlike anything the world had seen before. Machine guns mowed down waves of soldiers, and poison gas brought a new level of terror to the battlefield. The war became a grim stalemate, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. This is their story. The story of the men who lived and died in the trenches, who faced unimaginable horrors, and yet found the strength to carry on. The causes of World War I were complex and interconnected, a tangled web of alliances, rivalries, and ambitions. It was a conflict decades in the making, fueled by a potent mix of nationalism, imperialism, militarism, and a series of diplomatic blunders. Understanding these underlying causes is crucial to comprehending the outbreak of this catastrophic war and its enduring impact on the world. The alliances and rivalries that had been building for years finally reached a breaking point. Nationalism, the belief in the superiority of one's own nation, drove countries to assert their dominance. Imperialism, the desire to expand one's empire, led to conflicts over territories. Militarism, the belief in the power of a strong military, fueled an arms race that made war inevitable. Diplomatic efforts to prevent war failed as leaders miscalculated and miscommunicated. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the final straw, setting off a chain reaction that plunged Europe into war. Understanding these underlying causes is crucial to comprehending the outbreak of this catastrophic war and its enduring impact on the world. The war was not just a clash of armies, but a clash of ideologies and ambitions. This war was a clash of empires, a struggle for dominance on a global scale. The old powers of Europe, driven by a thirst for power and prestige, had been locked in a dangerous game of brinkmanship for years. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, provided the spark that ignited this powder keg, plunging Europe and eventually the world into the abyss of war. The world would never be the same. The war left a legacy of destruction and loss, but also of resilience and hope. It reshaped the world in ways that are still felt today. The leaders of Europe, driven by their own ambitions and rivalries, failed to see the bigger picture. Their actions set the stage for a conflict that would engulf the entire world. The dangerous game of brinkmanship, where nations pushed each other to the edge, finally reached its breaking point. The world watched in horror as the conflict unfolded, realizing too late the true cost of their ambitions. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the spark that ignited the powder keg of Europe. His death set off a chain reaction that led to the mobilization of armies and the declaration of war. The world was plunged into a conflict that would last for 4 long years, leaving a legacy of destruction and loss. The war changed the world in ways that are still felt today. The mobilization of armies and the declaration of war marked the beginning of a new era. The world would never be the same again. The Great War left an indelible mark on the world, reshaping nations and societies. Its legacy is a reminder of the cost of conflict and the importance of striving for peace. Nationalism, a powerful force in the early 20th century, played a significant role in the outbreak of World War I. This era was marked by a fervent belief in the superiority and destiny of one's nation, often at the expense of others. It was a time when people felt an intense pride in their nation and its achievements, celebrating milestones and victories with unparalleled enthusiasm. National holidays and parades became grand displays of unity and strength. This pride was often accompanied by a desire for independence or dominance, as many groups sought to assert their identity and autonomy. Movements for self-determination gained momentum, challenging existing power structures. This fervent nationalism fueled rivalries between nations, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and distrust. Diplomatic relations were strained and alliances were formed and broken with alarming frequency. In the Balkans, a region simmering with ethnic and nationalistic tensions, nationalism was particularly potent. The diverse ethnic groups in this area each harbored aspirations for their own nation-states, leading to a volatile mix of ambitions. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, a sprawling multi-ethnic empire, faced growing unrest from within, particularly from Slavic groups seeking independence. The empire's attempts to maintain control only intensified these desires for freedom. Serbia, a relatively new nation-state, championed the cause of Pan-Slavism, promoting the unification of all Slavic peoples. This vision of a united Slavic nation resonated deeply with many, further destabilizing the region. This put it at odds with Austria-Hungary, which saw Serbian ambitions as a direct threat to its territorial integrity. The tension between these two nations was a powder keg waiting to explode. Nationalism also manifested itself in the intense rivalry between France and Germany. The two nations were locked in a bitter competition for dominance in Europe. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870-71, which resulted in a humiliating defeat for France and the loss of Alsace-Lorraine, left a deep scar on the French psyche. This loss was a national trauma that fueled a desire for revenge. Revanchism, the desire to avenge this defeat and reclaim lost territory, became a powerful motivator in French politics. The French government and military were driven by a determination to restore national honor. Germany, on the other hand, having achieved unification under Otto von Bismarck, was eager to assert its newfound power on the world stage. The unification had transformed Germany into a major European power, and it sought to expand its influence. Its growing industrial and military might fueled its ambitions, creating a sense of unease among its neighbors. Germany's rapid development in these areas was seen as a direct challenge to the existing balance of power. Nationalism, with its emphasis on national glory and competition, created a climate where war seemed not only possible but inevitable. The fervor for national superiority and the desire to settle old scores made conflict almost unavoidable. The stage was set for a global confrontation, as nations, driven by nationalistic fervor, prepared for the ultimate test of their strength and resolve. The late 19th and early 20th centuries witnessed an intense scramble for colonies, particularly in Africa and Asia. This period, often referred to as the New Imperialism, saw European powers aggressively expanding their territories and influence across the globe. European powers, driven by economic and strategic interests, competed fiercely for control of territories overseas. The Industrial Revolution had created a voracious appetite for raw materials and new markets, and colonies were seen as essential to national prosperity and security. This competition for colonies, driven by a desire for raw materials, new markets, and strategic advantage, exacerbated existing tensions between the great powers. The quest for dominance in these regions often led to conflicts and diplomatic crises, as nations vied for the most valuable and strategically located territories. The rivalry between Britain and Germany was particularly acute. Britain, with its vast and well-established empire, viewed Germany's colonial ambitions with suspicion and alarm. Germany, a latecomer to the colonial game, felt entitled to a larger share of the colonial pie. Under the leadership of Kaiser Wilhelm II, Germany sought to assert itself as a global power, challenging the established colonial powers and seeking to carve out its own empire. Its ambitions often clashed with those of Britain, which had established a vast global empire. The British were determined to maintain their dominance and saw German expansion as a direct threat to their interests. The race for colonies fueled a naval arms race, with both nations building larger and more powerful warships to protect their interests. The construction of dreadnoughts and other advanced warships became a symbol of national power and prestige, further heightening tensions. The scramble for colonies also poisoned relations between France and Germany. The two nations had a long history of rivalry, and their colonial ambitions only added fuel to the fire. The Moroccan crises of 1905 and 1911, in which Germany challenged French influence in Morocco, brought the two countries to the brink of war. These crises were emblematic of the broader struggle for power and influence that characterized the era. These crises deepened mistrust and suspicion, making diplomacy increasingly difficult. The intricate web of alliances and rivalries that defined European politics at the time meant that any colonial dispute had the potential to escalate into a larger conflict. The pursuit of empires, driven by greed and a sense of national pride, created a volatile international environment. Nations were willing to go to great lengths to expand their empires, often at the expense of peace and stability. The scramble for colonies was not just about acquiring land. It was about prestige, power, and the belief in one's nation's superiority. Colonial possessions were seen as a measure of national greatness, and the competition for them was fierce and unrelenting. This toxic mix of imperialism and nationalism pushed Europe closer to the precipice of war. The alliances and rivalries that had been built up over decades created a situation where a conflict in one part of the world could quickly spiral into a global war. The scramble for colonies was a key factor in the tensions that ultimately led to the outbreak of World War I, as nations sought to protect and expand their empires at any cost. Militarism, the glorification of military strength, and the belief that war is a necessary and even desirable instrument of national policy, cast a long shadow over Europe in the years leading up to World War I. Driven by industrialization and technological advancements, a dangerous arms race had gripped the great powers. Germany, under the leadership of Kaiser Wilhelm II, embarked on an ambitious program of naval expansion, challenging Britain's long-standing dominance at sea. The construction of dreadnoughts, massive battleships armed with powerful guns, heightened tensions between the two nations. This naval arms race was mirrored on land, with each nation expanding its armies and developing new weapons. France, determined to avenge its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, introduced conscription, requiring all able-bodied men to serve in the military. This led to a dramatic increase in the size of the French army, further fueling the arms race. The rapid pace of military build-up created a climate of fear and suspicion. Military leaders, with their emphasis on offensive strategies and rapid mobilization, exerted increasing influence on government policy. The belief that war was inevitable, even desirable, became widespread. This militaristic mindset, coupled with the constant threat of war, made diplomacy increasingly difficult and raised the stakes of any potential conflict.